All right, here we go. The Defiant Spirit. Welcome back. I am Baruch Levy, also known as B. I am the creator of the Defiant Spirit, the Defy Your Number Enneagram system. For anybody who's just joining us for the first time, I bring together, I think for the first time ever, not a real popular niche that I've gone after, but my two passions coinciding with the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl, as many of you know through his book Man's Search for Meaning, although he has, as I understand it, 40 books. I've been saying over 30, but it is, I think, over 40 or 40. And his work of logotherapy. I'm a logotherapist, meaning-centered living, guidance therapy, and the Enneagram, an ancient personality energetic roadmap assessment system. And so I bring those two things together in the Defiant Spirit. And that's really the focal point of my work now, both with clients and in teaching. Many different opportunities to work together, to learn together. And one of them is this, the podcast. So I'm glad you found us, whether it's vis-a-vis audio or video. For those of you joining us on audio, great, wonderful. You will be missing some visuals, but I promise to describe to you everything you need to fully resonate with, connect with, understand, utilize, and experience the Enneagram. And in today's podcast, Enneagram number 6, the Loyalist. So again, if you're just joining us, the past 5 podcasts for the Defiant Spirit have been an overview, starting with Enneagram 1 till now, Enneagram 6. We have been doing just an overview or phase 1 in my program. I have 4 phases of each Enneagram type. And so now we're up to Enneagram 6, the Loyalists. And also, I've been working with my friend and partner on Wealth 360. That's adapting each of the Enneagram types through and seeing them through the lens of wealth, investment, finance. Michael Feiner and I have been doing it. And so we are caught up through Enneagram 5. We'll be taking on Enneagram 6 this week, or we'll be sharing it this week after you get to know the basics of the Loyalist. So if you like these slides, you will love them in my program. I have like 42 pages per ebook, each one beautifully crafted to bring to life the Enneagram types. And I think this one is very important to just understand who we're talking about, because of all of the types, this one is the hardest to describe. It's got the widest range or spectrum of subtypes, kind of the nuances of this type. So one extreme of this type will look very different than the other extreme. Sometimes the Enneagram 6 is called the skeptic, the loyal skeptic, the devil's advocate, the servant. Few other ones that I've heard. It's got a lot of different names. I call it the loyalist because I think it really describes what an Enneagram 6 is aspiring to loyalty, both towards them and to whatever they're focused on, whomever they're focused on. So we'll go with the loyalist. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's always the same energetically 6 in all systems, regardless of the label. So the 6, the loyalist, has 2 fundamental different types. This is the only one in the Enneagram system that really is broken down into 2 types of that core type. Now, every core type, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, has subtypes, 3 separate subtypes. But that's not what this is. There are still 3 separate subtypes of Enneagram 6, but there are 2 types of Enneagram 6 that can't. I don't want to go down too far a rabbit hole. Let's just say for now that there are 2 types of 6. In a future podcast, we'll do the subtypes. But regardless of that podcast, this one, there's what's called the phobic 6 and the counterphobic 6. And every 6 has both of these components or qualities. But on the edges or the extremes, you can really see it pronounced. So let me describe to you the core type of the 6, and then I'll share with you some of these famous examples if you're not looking at our slide. Enneagram sixes, well, I'm not going to read it. I'll just paraphrase what it says on this. Enneagram sixes are the most loyal, devoted of all types. They are driven to be safe and secure. They long for safety and security more than any other type. It's just their oxygen, and they want to provide it as well. That depends on their subtype, how much they're focused on themselves versus others, but they all want it for themselves and for others. Enneagram sixes are part of the head type. We'll get into that, which means that they default to thinking, and thinking is the seat of many things, not the least of which is anxiety. Right? Anxiety is manufactured in the head, whereas the 8, 9, and 1 are the gut types, and we say that they're really defined by anger, which comes much more from a body level. um, in Thinking is the seat of anxiety and fear. I mean, think about how much of your anxiety is actually true versus how much of it is manufactured in your head. At 3 a.m., when you're lying in bed, what percentage of your fears are actually grounded in reality? A very small percentage. I have something like 80,000 thoughts a day. I would imagine most of them are fiction, right? They're just not grounded in reality. And so a six type gets caught in this, and they can get stuck very quickly and deeply into anxiety, into fear. Now, out of this anxiety or fear come the expressions of two different types, reactions of two different types. So the one is the phobic, and the phobic just embraces their fear or succumbs to their fear if they're not doing the work, if they're not conscious. And so they look anxious, they look neurotic. You think about some of these these phobic sixes. I'm looking at Larry David, Jason Alexander, Chris Rock, Adam Sandler. You can feel the anxiety. If you ever watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, this is phobic six. An extremely unhealthy phobic six is Woody Allen. Lots of comedians are phobic sixes, and I'll tell you why a little bit later on. But they're all dealing with anxiety. And then other ones on here, I guess, that are still in the phobic section: Sarah Jessica Parker, Jennifer Aniston, Ellen DeGeneres, Ben Affleck, Julia Roberts, Marilyn Monroe, Meg Ryan. So they're phobic sixes from as much as I know about them. Now, that's one way of expressing or dealing with our anxiety and our fears, is just kind of acquiescing, succumbing to it. The other way is a little bit harder to notice in somebody because they may look like a different type altogether. So we call them the counterphobic. And these are ones that go against their fears. They're still motivated by anxiety and fear. They just charge headfirst into the fears. So they're the ones who look like the tough guys in movies, the tough gals, right? The kind of the edgier, harder edge, almost fearless, until you really see where it's coming from. They sometimes they'll mistype as um, eights or maybe sexual fours, but they're coming, they're motivated, they're driven by a fear or a phobia. So I'm thinking of Mike Tyson. I just watched the biopic on um, Mike Tyson. I forgot what, I think it's on Hulu. It's all about Mike Tyson's life coming up as Mike Tyson. And I mean, the guy is unequivocally an afraid six, so much fear, but then he just harnesses it and uses it at his best and channels it into the ring. Although most of the time he didn't channel it, he was driven by his fears far more than he drove his fears. You look at Mark Wahlberg is in here, Roseanne Barr. These are, you can just feel like there's an angst underneath, but then they get really aggressive or intense at times. You can see it in their movies: Patrick Swayze, Paul Newman, Eminem, Robert Redford. George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush, both Bushes, I think, are sixes. You can certainly feel the counterphobic in George W. Bush. I'm not sure H.W. Bush was counterphobic as much as phobic, but George W. Bush definitely counterphobic. People are somewhat surprised to see him in the six, but that's because he took his fears and he kind of inflated himself, right? That machismo type thing is very much a counterphobic six. So it's almost like a facade so that they can fool either others or themselves into them not being afraid, but they are afraid. It comes from a place of fear. We all have fear. Sixes just feel it more at the surface. Some other defining qualities about six is that fear is really a wonderful thing. I mean, without fear, we are going to end up destroying ourselves. I want my children to have a certain amount of fear of touching the fireplace when it's on when they're little kids, right? You want that healthy degree of fear. We want people to take precaution. We don't want anybody to be stuck and stifled in fear. So that's when it crosses over into something destructive. But fear unto itself has a bad rap in our society. You want to get rid of your fears. You want to get rid of anxiety? Absolutely not. I want anxiety. I just don't want to be managed by it. I want to be able to manage it. And that's where sixes struggle a little more than the other types. How is anxiety good? I can hear somebody asking me in my head. I have actually had this conversation many, many times. Because when I work with a client, I don't try and help them try and get rid of their anxiety. I try to help them understand, what is anxiety? Where is it coming from? Does it have something to offer? Anxiety is what can get us out of bed in the morning and get us moving. So, like I'm anxious. I don't want to die. I don't have a desire to die. I don't want to, I want to maximize my time here, make it last as long as possible, and also make it as meaningful as possible. That anxiety is a good thing. It motivates, it moves me to do important things with my life. I want other people to have a sense of being anxious. Anxiety is energy. It's not a negative. It's not a positive. It's just what it is. The question is, what do we do with it? Like all inner experiences, like all thoughts, like all feelings, we just need to understand them, and we need to harness them, and we need to respond, not react with them. So sixes have a tremendous energy to them. I don't meet too many sixes who are apathetic. Now, sixes can get caught in what I call analysis paralysis. So they'll get stuck in a spin cycle, and maybe they don't go anywhere because they can't make a decision. They're overwhelmed and they end up just kind of standing still. But that's different than apathy. That's different than shutting down. There are other types where sometimes it's hard for me to help them access energy, but not with sixes. With sixes, it's usually about redirecting that energy in a more constructive, productive way. So that energy is what causes sixes to do things like volunteer. I don't have data, but I would imagine a disproportionate amount of sixes volunteer their time, their resources, energy to causes, to others, to something beyond themselves. There are some types that I have to work very hard at helping them get past themselves to serve. Fives or fours, for instance, but not sixes. Sixes are natural servants. I would imagine a disproportionate amount of sixes serve in the armed forces. They probably are disproportionately represented in law enforcement and firefighters and all kinds of worthy, noble professions, because they want to confront and deal with issues of safety and security if they're healthy, if they're responsive. They want to belong. It's a big one for sixes. Sixes long to belong. They crave authority, systems, structures that can support them, provide for them, take care of them. And in the absence of a good leader to follow or a good system to participate in, they'll step up and they'll take on leadership roles. So sixes are interesting in that way. They are the best followers. They can be some of the best leaders. I imagine a lot of, corporate environments are led with sixes, eights and threes for sure, sevens probably, sixes definitely, maybe not as much as those other types, but more than the rest of the Enneagram types. Because again, they make great followers, but they can also make great leaders in the absence of clear, definitive leadership or systems. Now, they're loyal. So, loyalty is oftentimes thought of as a positive, and it can be. Obviously, two people standing, on the wedding day, committing to each other. I imagine that's a top priority you want from your spouse. I certainly did. Loyal. I wanted somebody who's loyal, faithful, who would be there for me through thick and thin till death do us part. Um, But loyalty unto itself doesn't it's not moral, it's not a good thing because we can be loyal to the wrong people or the wrong things. So sometimes we're loyal, in a relationship that long expired and is detrimental to our well-being, sometimes physically. I've counseled many people who have been in abusive relationships and they continue to remain loyal to somebody that hasn't earned, doesn't deserve their loyalty. Or what about, it's an extreme example, but it's an important example. What about the Nazis, right? It's not just that a handful of people committed one of the greatest atrocities in human history. It's that most, if not a majority of the German people went along with it, didn't fight back, didn't resist, became complicit. Maybe they weren't actively involved, but they certainly went along with the system. Enough people go along with a bad system, and that's how these systems are perpetuated. We're loyal to the wrong people, to the wrong leader, to the wrong system. So, loyalty unto itself isn't a good thing or a bad thing. It depends what we're loyal to. Sixes are also prepared. If you live your life with a constant fear or sense of anxiety, you're always running SWOT analyses, if you will, running threat analysis when you walk into a room, a new situation. Sixes are the ones who are going to be able to tell you if you ask them afterwards, did you see where the exits were? Did you notice, any codes being violated? They're the ones who see on the wall it says maximum occupancy 360, and they're probably counting 288, 289. So, they're the ones who take that seriously. They're the ones who, I don't know, you go hiking with and you cut your leg and they have the first aid kit ready to go, or they have the snake venom, the rare thing in that backpack that you would have never even in a million years thought of, and they've just been waiting for it. They're probably the ones who were least surprised by the COVID pandemic. I think they'd been waiting their whole life, not in a morbid or masochistic way for the COVID to happen, but sort of in a told you so kind of way, because their whole life has been prepping. They're probably the preppers for, I don't know, World War III and those. They're probably the ones you see, like, old movies. Maybe you had one in your house of bomb shelters back in, what was it, the 50s, when they built bomb shelters in their backyard. I think somebody in my neighborhood had one growing up. And you wonder who built those things. Well, it's probably an Enneagram 6. They're probably the ones who have those vacuum packed food rations, that last 20 years in a storage room. And they're certainly the ones who had all the toilet paper during COVID when the rest of us eights couldn't find them, or any other type besides sixes. Sixes were prepared, oftentimes overly prepared, oftentimes overly cautious and concerned, and it can become stifling for them. Look, my heart aches for a six, partially because when I look at my Enneagram assessment, and if you do this with me, you'll see all 9 of your types rank ordered, and it's my lowest number. So it's the one I have sort of least access to. I need more access to it. I think Ariella, my wife, wishes I had some more access, then I would be prepared in situations that sometimes I'm not. But I really struggle with six. It's a very self-preservation kind of oriented type. And so my heart aches because I can feel their angst. I work with quite a few sixes. A good friend of mine's a six, and they just live with Milan Kundera's wrote the famous book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, because they're right. Being alive is unbearably light. I mean, you can be here, and then by the end of the day, you or a loved one will be gone. It's a matter of not if, but when. Probably not today, but sixes live as if it could be every time they walk out the house. Now, there are varying degrees of health, or if they're reactive or responsive. So I've worked with sixes across the spectrum, and the reactive ones really can get stuck in an analysis paralysis, in a fear, can become toxic and phobic, paranoia. So you look at like a Vladimir Putin, an extreme six, um, probably Hitler was an extreme six. They're counterphobic, so there's more of an aggression, but you can feel the with Putin, for example, you can feel him degenerating over the past year, right? Or past few years. I mean, he's always been this kind of anxious, paranoid type. How can you not be? He came up through the KGB. But especially over what he's done in Ukraine, you can feel them sort of falling apart, imploding, making terrible decisions, atrocious decisions. But even regardless of how you feel about the Ukraine Russia thing, just bad decisions from a military perspective. My partner in Wealth 360, Michael Feiner, is a retired general from the National Guard. And so we had a whole podcast a year ago or so. We've talked many times about Putin's, I don't know, unhealthy sixness and the bad decisions he's made as a general, I think, or as a leader, in no small part because of that implosion that a six can go through. Now, you don't have to be an extreme. You can still struggle as a six. I've worked with a lot of sixes who really have to get back to orienting the world by what's going on inside of them, not what's going on outside of them, controlling what they can, letting control go of anything they can't control, which is most everything. Sixes need to break this pattern of playing out worst case scenarios. I think meditation is a great thing for an Enneagram six, because it really it forces them to pull their attention back from all of the things that are rushing through their head, and just to get centered, to get calm, to get clear, back to that place of knowing, of certainty. And that's some of the work that I would do with the six, is help them come back to, but what is right? What is good? What is bringing you safety and security in any moment? I don't care what you're going through. There's always something safe and secure that is immovable, right? Maybe it's a value that we have within us. Maybe it's a person in our life, an activity, something. And my starting point with the six is always to get them back to that strong foothold so that they can start to move forward. Another piece about sixes, you can feel it, is they have a deep need to belong, which is a beautiful thing, to create community, to be a part of a community. Back when I was a rabbi, I would guess that most of the congregants, of the parishioners, were probably sixes and twos for different reasons. But sixes are the ones who, they're the people who show up in organizations, who participate. They're probably disproportionately, again, like I said, serving in military because they want to belong to something and they want to participate in something bigger than themselves. I imagine they're, most of the foot soldiers in our companies, our organizations. So sixes really teach us how to serve because of this belonging. Now, they can also over subscribe, over identify with the organization. They're probably the ones who have the hardest time with change when we start to change an organization. I learned this like 50 different ways, the hard way, when I was a rabbi and I would change something. If I had the language for it now, I would have really identified the sixes and understood that they don't like change because change brings up insecurity. Enneagram sevens love change. So their next door neighbor, the seven, the enthusiast, needs change. Sixes almost need the excuse me, the absence of change, the stability of that kind of certainty. And so there's a book I read a long time ago, a business book, Who Moved My Cheese? You really disrupt and disturb an Enneagram 6 type when you move their cheese, when you, I don't know, change the bagels at the luncheon at the end of the Sabbath services at our synagogue. There were just trivial moments that weren't trivial to sixes. I mean, they were trivial, but they weren't perceived as trivial because I was rocking their boat and I didn't think long and hard about people who resist change. Last few things on sixes, and we'll start to wrap it up. Um, so sixes want to belong, and one way that they'll deal with that is through making themselves likable. So this is especially true with one of the subtypes, self-preservation sixes, or we'll call them in this case phobic sixes. That's why there's so many sixes that become comedians, because there's this self-preservation, this angsty piece, sort of a defense tactic. If I can make myself likable, lovable, right, then I'll be needed. It's kind of the what's the word I'm looking for? We'd say in Yiddish, nebbish, the the nerdy kind of a kid who really plays up their nerdiness so that they are perceived as a non-threat. You've seen it in 1,000 different movies. So they just embrace their nerdiness, their non-threatening nature to the cooler kids to ingratiate themselves. So you see a lot of comedian types like that, like again Chris Rock or Woody Allen, and they really play up their phobias, play up the fears. It's a strategy to stay alive. It's a defense tactic to show that you're not threatening. That's one extreme. The other extreme are then those who amp it up and become tough and look fearless when in fact they're filled with fear, but they're trying to look tough. So you think about sort of the bully type, who's just fighting everybody tooth and nail to show that they're not afraid, when in fact underneath the surface they're deeply terrified. But they're just two different strategies to stay alive. So this is how they move about the world. Back in the back of their head is always the world is an unsafe, threatening place. So again, a lot of empathy for a 6 to be in a very scary world, especially over the past couple of years. As I'm recording this, the world feels like it's been upside down, and I think it's taken a particular toll on 6s. Yeah, I do believe they were disproportionately prepared for some of these things, although many of these things we couldn't have seen happening. The unrest during the BLM riots. And imagine if a 6 was in kind of the path of one of those riots, it was just validating for what he or she has always felt like. We're just one social disruption away from chaos. So it's been a very chaotic time. And again, I think that they have felt it very deeply, profoundly, and probably paid a heavy price for it. So one of my favorite quotes is it's a very Sixers quote. Just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me. I think it was Joseph Heller who said that. Just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me. So there is this, not to say that all 6s live in paranoia, but that they ultimately feel it and the anxieties of the world much more than the rest of us. They also can make some of the greatest saviors in some ways in our world, in our society. And I think this is something that they really want to be able to do, to become saviors. Again, like I mentioned, to be the one with the first aid kit and a backpack. But I imagine also a disproportionate amount of 6s end up as like fire chief, police chief, military general, whatever, because they really do want to help people stay out of harm's way or help them when they are in harm's way. So this motivates them to be safe and secure and to provide that safety and security for others. Last couple of things. Well, here, we'll end with this last one. I'm looking at a slide. It says 6's core work. I have this slide for every type. The core work of a 6 is to understand that their fear has something deep and profound to offer them into the world. And their job is to stand guard against allowing it to overtake them. They'll never get rid of it. If you're a human being, you'll never live without anxiety. And if you're a six, forget about it. The question is, do you own it, or does it own you? Do you harness it and utilize it to make preparations and changes within reason to motivate you to help others, or does it stifle you? Does it cause you to hoard, to retreat, to seal yourself off behind closed walls, literally or figuratively? And for sixes, it's about facing the fear, as that saying goes, and feeling the fear and doing it anyways, because there's really no such thing as truly being fearless. It's about feeling the fear, harnessing it and using it, not being used by it. So those are some of the big pieces of being an Enneagram 6, the loyalist, the loyal skeptic. If you want more, I have a whole book on the Enneagram 6, 45 pages, chock full of things that you've seen if you're tuning in vis-a-vis YouTube. If not, you'll reach out to me and we'll get you all connected and teed up with your Defy Your Number Enneagram type, or if you already know your type, we'll get you the Enneagram 6, and you'll see for yourself some of the reactive elements of being a 6, some of the responsive opportunities of being a 6, because again, remember, we are never just a number. There's the low side, there's the high side, the reactive side, the responsive side. We always have the power to choose to defy our number, to live our defiant spirit. That's the work we're all here to do. I will see you in the next video when we take on Enneagram number 7, the enthusiast. Until then, defy your number, live your spirit.